Thanks for joining the show today. I have a guest on the show who I met during the 2019 Don't Wait Project tour along the southern states. And we met in a town that's almost as hard to pronounce as Wenatchee, Waxihatchi, I think it is, at a campground where there were hundreds of women camping. And here was this fabulous woman I met, Kate Dunbar, who is also known as the Campground Gourmet. And she cooked me a fabulous dinner, and we visited and became friends. And we've been in touch all of this time. Couldn't have known where our friendship would bring us. She has recently become a widow very unexpectedly. And we are here to talk about her journey. It is only 4 months old, and also how it's affected her work and her family and what she's learned already so far. We do not intend for this to be a sad conversation, but it might be. But we do intend it to be enlightening, perhaps for you, perhaps for me, perhaps for Kate, perhaps for all of us. Thank you so much for being here. Let me introduce Kate.
Hi, Lisa. It's so good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. I follow you on Instagram, and
I follow you too.
and I was really confused all of a sudden when I saw your post about your husband passing away. And we talked about earlier how I mentioned earlier, and you and I have talked about this at length off of camera, about how who would have known that we would share this in common.
Right. It's true. It's like I said, it's another link in our story together that we get to join up on, and you get to teach me and I get to absorb and learn from you and your passage through time of this.
Well, I was talking about how this episode will be more of a volley of a conversation, because a lot of times I have someone on the show who's an expert at something, and it's my job to ask questions that maybe the audience wants me to ask, and to do a lot of listening and maybe some interjection. But in this case, we're going to have a conversation.
Yeah. Just like we're back at the campground and I'm making you the chicken. I made you Mediterranean chicken with olives and vegetables and all of that.
Fantastic. And I have to tell you this, when I met you, I thought, first of all, what a great job you have to get to travel the country with this fabulous, the Airstream, camper with all that it needs. And you have this whole setup, and you talked a lot about your husband and his support of you, and he's your recipe taster. And I know that for you to be off on the road camping and doing the business that you run so effectively, that he's at home holding down the fort with your young twins.
He absolutely, and we needed to add in my mother into that too, because my mother lived with us. She has dementia. She, over COVID, over the lockdown time, she moved into assisted living. But for 5 years, as I was on the road, traveling and teaching and cooking and cultivating relationships with farmers and other food artisans and all of that, he was Mr. Mom. He was caregiver for my mom. Like he had it. That was the deal. If I was going to take on this new career path, then he said, I'm out. I'm not going back to work. I'm at home. This is what I'm going to do, because we can't split our time anymore, and we need to have an anchor at the house. So that's the position that he took.
So in your professional life and in your personal life, you had a partner.
Absolutely. 100%.
True partner.
It really was a true partner. I mean, he was everything from, the laundry folder to the kid had to go to a doctor to I needed a recipe tasted. I needed a copy editor. I needed to just grab a glass of wine and him a beer and go sit down at our fire ring and just be quiet, and get it was everything that he just, everything.
So then let's explain to people what it is you do through the Campground Gourmet. I mean, it kind of speaks for itself, but really, I mean, I think you exceed what anyone would think that means. So let's tell people briefly what it is that you do.
All right. So I am a cookbook author. I'm a recipe developer and a food photographer. I'm an ambassador for Airstream. So I write articles for their magazine. I do blogs and videos for them cooking. I teach outdoor cooking classes, and I specifically hone in on women's organizations, women's outdoor camping ones. I'm a member of Sisters on the Fly. So I have a big sisterhood that I'm a part of, and my main job is, you know, I want to teach you to cook something that tastes great, that's not too difficult, but that you'll feel confident about yourself doing. That's the number one thing that I've always been about from the time I had my restaurant to now this new career path. I just want you to create amazing memories while you make meals for yourself or for your family.
And the fact that you can do it with the setup that you have, you know, when you cooked for me that night, I was like, how can I help? How can I help? And you said, just relax, I've got this. And within less than 30 minutes, 20 minutes, we had this gourmet meal. That's why
it was so much fun.
Gourmet, right? And it was just absolutely delicious. It was top 3 meals I had in the South on that whole trip.
Aww.
And, you know, and we're on the road the whole time, a different city every 2 days. There's nothing homey about that experience except spending that time with you. So I want to take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about what happened to your husband and how unexpected it was, and just the bit that you're learning in this short amount of time, and how it's affecting your work for the good and for probably the side that you're having to work so much harder at that you hadn't expected.
Yeah, the change,
Yes.
the new.
Yes, a lot of people turn to food for comfort during difficult times, and this has brought you next to no comfort. You've had to really work through to rebuild this part of your life that is your livelihood. So let's take a break. We're talking with Kate Dunbar. Check her out, the Campground Gourmet, not only for her food, but for her inspiration. We'll be back in just a moment. We're back here with Kate Dunbar of the Campground Gourmet. In the first segment, Kate, we talked about a little bit about the loss of your husband, but we didn't get into much detail about how it happened. I know you're willing to share that and the process you've been through of letting go of the guilt that was attached to the loss of him. So if you're comfortable, want to share how he passed, then we can dive into the other stuff you and I talked about off air.
Got it. So 3 weeks prior to my husband's passing, he was at his doctor's office and received an amazing bill of health. Cholesterol down, blood pressure down, weight down, everything. So he was totally happy. Everything was great. The night of September 30th, my husband's right arm started hurting, and his shoulder did, his back did. The elbow was going numb, fingers were going numb, and I got really concerned and went to him and said, hey, this isn't like you. It's late at night. I think we need to call an ambulance, like something's wrong. No, I'm fine. I already booked an appointment for the doctor the next day. It's 10:15 in the morning. I got a little frustrated with him, and I just decided to go to our bedroom, flip on Netflix, stuff like that, fell asleep, and I heard him come into the room, and he was on his side of the bed, and he said, I love you. And I said, I love you too. And then he said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And then I went to sleep. And a little while later, I hear a crash on the floor, and my husband has collapsed. And my husband was an EMT. He was in the military, first aid, everything. He made certain that we all knew this because we traveled and we had to know it. Assess the situation. Call 911. He's not breathing. His heart is stopped. I'm working on him. And that was the longest 10 minutes I've ever experienced. And I knew when he left. I knew it. I was holding his head and just telling him that help was on the way and that I loved him and that just to hang on, just one more time, babe, just hang on one more time. They worked on him for 47 minutes, and the men that were here and everybody that came in crashing into our house at 4:45 in the morning on the 1st of October were all heroes. And they didn't want to stop because they knew that our 2 young children were upstairs, and I was in the living room, and most of the guys that were working on him were veterans, and they could see the veterans things all in our house. So they knew that this was a brother, and they did everything they could. And I will be forever grateful for the heroics that they went through in that moment. But the shattering grief that washed over is something that you can't explain it unless if you walk that line. And it kind of reminds me of that Johnny Cash song in a way. It's like you'll never understand that experience until your feet hit the pavement of that path. And the guilt that I had up until just a few weeks ago was intense and dark and morbid and everything, because my husband had PTSD. He'd been over in Iraq, and it wasn't good over there. And he was one of those guys that life got a little too much, and I saved him twice from attempting suicide. So I had been down that route with him, and knowing that that mental disease that affects so many men and women is that powerful. And since I pulled him through that and helped him, and his counselors did and everything, the guilt of not being able to pull him through CPR is crushing. And that's what has been even harder to work through right now than the fact of losing my husband, is the fact that I just couldn't save him again. Whew.
When I reached out to you, not knowing what had happened, and we messaged each other about it, and there is that part that is, what could I have done differently? What if this or that had happened? Which is nothing that our husbands would want us to carry. If Wesley hadn't cleaned, my husband cleaned out an old cabinet in our garage that made him sick and short of breath. You know this, I'm just resharing it for the people watching. And he was fine Saturday morning, and that day he said he was short of breath, and that night he was worse, and within a month he was on oxygen, and a year later to the day he received a double lung transplant at 35 years old and died 6 weeks later. And I could have spent a lot of time really in that, what if he hadn't cleaned the garage? And I did spend a little time there, like you have. And then at some point, you're a mom, you're a business owner, you're a woman, you are strong, you are trying to be the best you can through this, and you can't carry that around and be the best you can. You can't.
It took a really good friend calling me. And that's another interesting thing about widowhood. You have a tribe that descends in on you, and then they pull out very quickly, because it's not fun to be around.
It's very uncomfortable for everyone involved.
It is. And she called me and she said, God, I feel you today. She's like, I'm having a fantastic day. And she is 1,400 miles away from me. She's like, you have got to drop that. She's like, I'm feeling it. It is toxic. It's going to drag you down. It is going to collapse everything that he knew you were known for, as being strong, as being that woman that blazes trails. She's like, you just have to let it go. Write it out. You need to write a post. Your next Thursday post needs to be about the guilt that you have, and you need to timeline it for everybody so they can see where you are, because if there's someone else maybe feeling this, they can self-check in a way. And so I did, because he passed on a Thursday, and every Thursday for the next year I'm writing.
Relive that.
So I'm writing a memory, I'm writing something, and that Thursday was, I've got to let this guilt go. Not the sadness, but the guilt that it was my fault that I didn't save him, because I'd already forgiven the emergency workers. I'd already forgiven
why
them.
were you holding yourself on the hook? And
Right.
the thing is, that might have been part of your husband's apology, like something's not right here, and he knew something you didn't.
That's, in hindsight, my husband rarely ever said, I'm sorry. Some of the most frustrating moments were just, I would look at him and just go like, why can't you say I'm sorry? Like, it would just fix it in a second. I don't say I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, the thing
And
go ahead.
It's knowing that the hardest words for him to say were his last words is something that's precious and painful. But I know it took a lot for him to say that and not wake me up and go, I'm in trouble.
He didn't, and I would guess by the way you're describing him, he didn't want you to carry all of that. And the thing about it is, when grief and other, really, for lack of a better, guilt and other, lack of a better term, things get in the way, the icky stuff grief is already so compounding and so difficult and complicated, and it's individual and it's personal. When some of that stuff gets in the way, we aren't learning the lessons we're supposed to learn. And you and I have talked off air about how when you cross this abyss of grief, doesn't mean you don't slide back over sometimes, but when you really have crossed that abyss of grief and you can see yourself on the other side of something you didn't know you could survive, there is so much strength in that. It can be a glorious experience when you get to that point, because you have children that you're still raising. I raised my son, that's done. I've raised myself, that's done. There's so much still I learn all the time because I'm open to the lesson. And sometimes you just don't want to be learning anything. You don't want to be part of this big, huge lesson we're supposed to experience on this planet. But what else is there?
Right. And I think that
these people we chose to spend our whole life with who are no longer here.
Yeah. And I think that letting go of that deep-seated, it's my fault, that's that first canyon on this. And it's like, because I can look back on that just a few weeks ago. Like, I mean, we're talking just weeks that this is happening.
I've already seen a difference in you, and I'm 3,000 miles from you.
Right. And it's just, when you cross that, when you cross the anger, when you cross the pure raw loss and trauma of that moment that has that deep grief, you're able to breathe a little better. And I can say that the lesson coming out of forgiving myself, forgiving the universe, forgiving my husband for that impact moment. I haven't forgiven him for his death. Don't like that. But the impact moment of it, I have. And I can look back and know I'm more present now for my children. I'm starting to be more present for my job. I'm starting to be more present for my friends. But I'm starting to be more present to the signs that I think, and I'm believing that he's sending me. Because I don't think that you can receive those, feel those, or imagine them, make them up, confabulation.
Or navigate them.
Right.
To navigate what that is part of the lesson, I think, as well, and just being open to those possibilities. There's just a thin veil between us and them. Just a thin veil.
I think so. And I mean, I'm not saying that I'm over this whatsoever. I'm over a micro portion of the pain.
You're through a big lesson that you needed to learn so far to get the rest of the way. So, you know, that one thing that I wanted to share with people that you and I discussed off air to discuss now, let's take a break and come back. And your job is food. And goodness knows, so many of us, including myself, use food for comfort or can't bear to eat because we're so distraught or stressed or sad.
Bored.
All those things. So I want to talk about how you're starting to transition back into the job that he was such a big part of and that Airstream ambassadorship. Let's take a break. We'll be back in just a moment. we're finishing up with Kate Dunbar, the Campground Gourmet. I'm going to have you back. I'm going to have you back because I think
I hope so.
the audience can learn a lot from the lessons that you're learning. But let's shift gears to the Campground Gourmet. I know you'd mentioned it. Food was hard for a while. Do you want much to do with
It is.
that?
I lost it with him leaving, with that side of my business. I lost the fun. I lost the passion. I didn't eat. I'm still not really eating, but I have to go back to work. I have a big job that I have to do, and he would be really upset with me if this is where I decided to stay. So I got to get back to work.
And part of getting back to work is this Airstream ambassadorship. Tell us about how long you worked on it and that came to fruition at a time when you thought he'd be here to see it.
I've been trying to work with NCWLIFE magazine and with a dealership or with the parent company for 5 years now. My husband promised me that if I got that job, he would come out from behind the camera. He would allow our children to be in front of the camera, our story to be told. And I've been pitching them for 5 years. And 6 weeks into my husband's passing, they came and found me. And I know it never would have happened because there wouldn't have been the story of continuing on with the plan with my husband. We were avid Airstream campers all over the United States. And I'm not letting that go. I just traded in our Airstream. I pick up a brand new one on Monday, and the kids and I hit the road, and I start filming my first cooking segment next Tuesday for them. So I'm the ambassador for Dallas Airstream here in Texas, and I'm a writer for NCWLIFE magazine now, and I got to go to work.
Well, you got to go to work. And the thing, what I love hearing about this part of your story is that sometimes things happen because something else happens, and I'm so glad you don't feel guilty about that. I'm so glad you're embracing that. And to get to do what you're doing at the level you're doing it, that's a huge accomplishment. And I know that you know that. And are your kids excited?
They are so excited because they didn't want it to stop. And they were really worried that we weren't going to go on and do the things that we'd been doing for the past 5 years. So, we've already got our plan. I've already got the campground reservations. We're on the road this summer for 7 weeks. And, new experiences, new adventures, and take my husband with me in every way possible, and literally just kind of cooking myself out of this mess.
And including your husband in part of the story, it's what I do. It's what I've been doing for a very long time. It's part of the work I'm supposed to do, I think, on the planet. So I hope you'll embrace that part of getting to tell that part of the story, because you will empower so many people to continue to do what they know they're meant to do, and maybe adding what you've learned along the way gives that inspiration to somebody else. It's just
I hope so.
The healing force of all things that we go through in life, whether it's widowhood or survivorship of something or whatever it is. It's an opportunity, and I'm just so proud of you. And I think that you and I, when COVID is over, should meet up and go on a camping trip.
Absolutely.
I've done my little share of camping, nothing compared to you, but traveling and getting to be in a different city all the time. But I think that you and I could do some work together and maybe help other people like us.
I think that we can feed a lot of broken hearts. I really do, through conversation, through food, through experiences, and knowing that none of us are alone on this path. We really aren't. We're all on a different thing, but we can all get through it together.
Well, to find Kate Dunbar and her story, as well as the Campground Gourmet, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you have a blog, all of the things. So not hard to find you. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Have you back. Have a wonderful time with your children. And
Thank you.
I just wish you the very best every single day for the rest of your life.
Thank you. You take care, and we're linked.
We're linked.
Do you want to become part of the most dependable brand of vehicles today? Then start looking at Town Toyota. Come drive the best-selling, totally redesigned 2019 RAV4. come check out the powerful towing performance of the Tundra. It's built for the worksite and the weekend. Forge your own path and seek tougher roads in the Tacoma. Leave no trail left unchallenged. Whatever your vehicle needs, Toyota has a seat for you. Come visit us today.